Melody had reached a new chapter in her life. After going through a painful past, she finally learned how to rise above the hurt. She made a promise to herself that from now on, her happiness would always come first. Melody was focusing on her career, her family, and her personal growth. Each day she worked on becoming stronger, not just for herself, but for the people around her. By her side was Carlos, who had become her greatest source of support. Carlos always reminded her that she deserved peace, respect, and love. With him in her corner, Melody began to believe that her past was finally behind her. On the other side, Martell's life looked very different. Time had left him lonely. The faces that once filled his days with light were now gone. Melody's absence created an emptiness in his life that nothing else could fill. During the day, Martell tried to appear fine to the world, but at night, silence forced him to face the truth of his mistakes. He began to realize that what he had carelessly broken with his own hands was the very thing his heart needed the most. For Melody, life was moving forward. For Martell, time felt frozen, and it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed once again. Martell's life had become a quiet battle within himself. No matter how much he tried to distract his mind, the truth always found a way back to him. He looked around and realized how much had changed. Friends who once stood close had drifted away, opportunities he once had slipped out of his hands, and the home he once dreamed of no longer existed. But the deepest loss of all was Melody. Every day, memories of her followed him like shadows. He remembered her laughter, the way she stood strong even in the worst moments, and how she always gave him more chances than he deserved. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that she had been the one person who truly believed in him when no one else did. Yet, instead of protecting that love, he had taken it for granted. This guilt began to eat away at him. Nights became the hardest to survive. Lying awake, Martell replayed every mistake in his head, every word he shouldn't have said, every choice he shouldn't have made. He felt the weight of regret pressing on his chest like it was never going to leave. For the first time in a long while, Martell admitted to himself that he was the reason his world had fallen apart. What hurt the most was knowing that Melody had managed to rebuild her life without him. She found strength in herself and comfort in Carlos's support, while Martell was left facing the emptiness of his own decisions. And in that loneliness, a painful truth became clear. He didn't just miss Melody, he needed her. Not for his pride, not for his image, but for his heart. Slowly, a thought began to grow inside him. What if he could face her again? What if he could lay down his pride and ask for forgiveness? He knew it wouldn't be easy, and he wasn't sure if she would even listen, but the desire to make things right became stronger than his fear. For the first time, Martell understood that begging for another chance might be the only way to show Melody how deeply sorry he truly was. Martell had reached a breaking point. The regret that lived inside him was no longer something he could push away. It followed him through every conversation, every meal, and every night when he laid down to sleep. He realized that running from his mistakes had only made the pain worse. If he wanted any peace at all, he would have to face the very people he had hurt the most, Melody and Carlos. For days, he debated with himself. What if Melody refused to even look at him? What if Carlos stepped in and told him to leave before he could even explain? These thoughts filled him with fear, but the guilt inside him was stronger than the fear. He told himself that even if they rejected him, at least he would finally have spoken the truth. At least they would know that his regret was real. Martell began to imagine the moment in his head over and over again. He pictured himself standing in front of Melody, finally dropping the walls he had built around his pride. He knew he couldn't make excuses. He couldn't try to explain away what he had done. All he could do was be honest. Honest about the pain he caused. Honest about the nights he spent wishing he could undo it all. And honest about wanting one more chance, even if it was a chance he didn't deserve. The decision weighed heavy on him. but he felt a strange kind of relief once it was made. For the first time, he had a clear path in front of him. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He wasn't going to pretend he was fine. He was ready to swallow his pride, walk into that room, and beg for forgiveness. Whether Melody and Carlos listened or not, Martell was determined to say the words that had been trapped inside him for far too long. The day Martell decided to face Melody and Carlos, his heart felt heavier than ever. Every step toward that meeting felt like walking into a storm he wasn't sure he could survive. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. Melody had every reason to turn away from him, and Carlos had every reason to protect her. But still, Martell pushed himself forward, because silence had already taken too much from him. When he finally stood in front of them, the atmosphere instantly turned tense. Melody's eyes were calm but guarded, holding the weight of someone who had endured too much to be fooled again. Carlos stood beside her, strong and steady, a silent reminder that Martell couldn't hurt her the way he once had. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by Martell's uneven breathing. Gathering the courage he had been searching for, Martell finally spoke. His voice was low and unsteady, carrying the rawness of his emotions. He admitted how much he had lost and how deeply he regretted the choices that led them here. His words weren't polished or perfect. They were broken, just like him. And for the first time, he allowed his guard to fall completely. His eyes filled with tears he could no longer hold back. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I broke something I can never fully repair. But I can't live with the silence anymore. I need you to hear me say I'm sorry. I need you to know that I would give anything to go back and choose differently." Melody didn't respond right away. She stood still, her expression unreadable, as if she was deciding whether to believe the man in front of her. Carlos watched closely, not with anger, but with a quiet strength, making it clear that he was there to protect Melody's peace no matter what happened. The air in the room was heavy with emotions, hurt, regret, and a small trace of something unspoken. In that moment, Martell realized he was no longer in control. All he could do was wait, hoping his words had reached their hearts. As the silence hung heavy in the room, Martell felt his chest tighten. He knew this was the moment that would either open a small door toward healing or close it forever. He swallowed hard, wiped his tears with the back of his hand, and finally spoke again, this time with nothing but desperation in his voice. "Melody," he began softly, his voice cracking, "I ruined everything we built. I let my pride, my selfishness, and my anger destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. I can't stand here and ask you to forget what I've done. I don't deserve that. But I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart to give me just one more chance to prove that I can be better." His words poured out like a confession he had been carrying for years. He admitted every mistake, every reckless decision, and every time he had hurt her when she deserved love instead. For once, Martell didn't try to justify his actions or explain them away. He simply owned them. Turning slightly toward Carlos, Martell's eyes showed both pain and humility. "Carlos, I know you've been there for her in ways I should have been. I know you've protected her and given her the peace I couldn't. And I respect that. I don't ask you to step aside. I don't even ask for a place in her life if she doesn't want it. All I'm asking is for a chance, for her to know that I am not the man I used to be, that I'm willing to fight for her trust, even if it takes the rest of my life." By the time he finished, Martell's voice was almost a whisper. His eyes glistened with tears, his body slumped as though the weight of his past had finally broken him down. There was no arrogance, no ego left, just a man stripped bare, pleading for forgiveness he knew might never come. The room fell silent again. Melody's expression softened slightly, though her pain was still clear. Carlos's face remained steady, but his eyes revealed a quiet understanding of how heavy those words had been. Martell, breathing hard, lowered his head, knowing the decision was no longer his to make. For a long moment after Martell's plea, the room was filled with silence. Melody stood still, her arms folded loosely across her chest, her eyes locked on Martell. She could see the pain in his face, hear the regret in his voice, and feel the weight of everything he had said. And yet, her heart carried the scars of years that couldn't be erased with just words. Inside, Melody felt torn. Part of her remembered the love they once shared, the laughter, the dreams they had built together. But another part of her still felt the sting of betrayal, the sleepless nights, and the loneliness she had endured because of his choices. She wanted to believe in his change, but she also knew that trust wasn't something that could simply be handed back. It had to be earned, slowly and honestly. Carlos watched quietly, standing just close enough to let Melody know she wasn't alone. He didn't interrupt or speak over her, because he understood that this was her moment. His role wasn't to decide for her, but to protect her from any more unnecessary pain. Still, his presence was powerful. His steady gaze reminded Martell that Melody was no longer vulnerable, no longer without someone to stand beside her. Finally, Melody spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried the firmness of a woman who had learned her worth. "Martell," she said softly, "I hear what you're saying. I can see that you're hurting. But do you understand how much it took for me to rebuild after everything you broke? Do you realize how hard it was to stand again when I felt like my whole world had collapsed?" Her words struck Martell deeper than any silence could have. He nodded, unable to speak, his tears only growing heavier. Melody looked at him for another moment before lowering her eyes. She wasn't ready to give an answer, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust still too fragile. Carlos then placed a hand gently on Melody's shoulder, speaking for the first time. His voice was steady but respectful. "Martell, if you truly mean what you've said, then you'll give her time. You can't expect her to decide today. If you've really changed, prove it, not just with words, but with actions. That's the only way she'll ever believe you." The room grew quiet once again. Melody didn't agree, but she also didn't reject him outright. Her silence was not forgiveness, but it wasn't final rejection either. It was space to think, to feel, and to decide what she truly wanted. Martell lowered his head, realizing that this was as much as he could hope for in that moment. He had spoken his truth. Now the choice was no longer his. After Martell spoke his last words and lowered his head, the room grew heavy with silence. Melody stood quietly, her thoughts tangled in a storm of emotions. She could still hear the cracks in his voice, see the raw regret in his eyes, and feel the weight of everything he had confessed. But her heart was not ready to make the decision. Too much had been broken, and no amount of tears could erase the scars overnight. Carlos stayed by her side, steady and protective, saying nothing more. His silence was a reminder that Melody didn't have to face this alone anymore. Whatever choice she made, he would stand with her. Martell slowly wiped his face and let out a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Melody one last time, his eyes filled with hope and fear at the same time. "I don't expect an answer today," he whispered. "I just needed you to hear me. Whatever you decide, I'll accept it." With those words, he turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of his entire past was pressing down on his back. He didn't know if he would ever hear from Melody again, but for the first time, he had spoken from his heart without hiding behind pride. As the door closed behind him, Melody sank into her chair, her face hidden in her hands. The room was quiet except for the sound of her slow, uneven breaths. Carlos reached for her hand, but he didn't push her to speak. He knew that in this moment, only Melody could decide how she truly felt. Would she see Martell's tears as proof of real change, or just another attempt to win back what he had lost? Could she risk opening her heart again to the man who had once broken it, or would she finally close that chapter for good? The answers weren't clear, not yet. All that remained was the silence between Melody and Carlos, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. And so the story ended not with a decision, but with a question, one that only time could answer. The room felt heavy after Martell's words faded into silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that carried memories, pain, and questions no one was ready to answer. Melody stood frozen, her eyes fixed on Martell, but her mind wandered through years of history with him. Every smile, every fight, every moment of heartbreak replayed in her mind, like a storm she thought she had left behind. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath weighed down by emotions she had spent so long trying to bury. Part of her wanted to believe that Martell's tears were real, that his regret came from a place of truth. Another part of her still carried the hurt, whispering to her not to be fooled again. She remembered the lonely nights, the broken promises, the tears she cried when no one was there to comfort her. Could she really open that door again? Carlos stood a few steps away, steady as always. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. He simply watched Melody, his presence a quiet shield of strength. He wasn't there to make the choice for her. He was there to remind her that she didn't have to face the weight of this decision on her own. His eyes followed Martell cautiously, but his heart was focused only on Melody's well-being.